another episode of Not Another Whiskey podcast. Now, for all those who listen to the show quite a bit, you'll know that we often get some amazing guests from the whiskey world, and today is no exception to that rule. It's my great pleasure to introduce a true trailblazer within the world of whiskey, Annabel Thomas. Annabel is the visionary founder and CEO of the Nc'nean Distillery, a name that has really kind of become, I suppose, synonymous with sustainability, innovation, and obviously exceptional quality of whiskey. Now, I first had the privilege of meeting Annabel back in, we reckon it was 2018. It was winter. She just started up the distillery way over on the west coast of Scotland. And straight away, I could see her passion for creating whiskey really kind of shone out, and she was unbelievable and spent so much time taking us around the distillery. And, you know, fast forward to today, and Nc'nean has achieved the remarkable milestone of becoming the first UK distillery to reach net zero emissions, along with producing some fantastic liquid. Annabel, incredible story. We're really looking forward to you telling it. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Mitch. Thanks for having me.
Of course.
Look at that. Mitch, you did your homework. You put like a lot of work into that. I'm impressed. Well done. Well done.
Thank you.
Good intro. Good intro. Annabel, welcome to the show. I'm delighted to meet you. And look, as Mitch said, like the passion, we were briefly chatting, but the passion for what you do is clearly evident. But can you walk us through like your background and how you came to being like, I'm going to build a distillery?
Yeah, everyone always, whenever I say I run a whiskey distillery, they're like, how do you end up doing that? Especially because I started life as a strategy consultant. So I used to work for a company called Bain & Co. in London, big global corporate business, advising big corporates on big decisions. And I was there for 8 years. And the idea for the distillery originally came from the place. So it's on my parents' farm. As Mitch said, it's way out on the west coast of Scotland, really, really remote. People always ask me the question again when they come, really, why did you build a distillery here? You're crazy. So that was the original genesis of the idea. But I guess where my passion for doing it really came from was this desire to bring sustainability and innovation to the whiskey world. I had been lucky enough to spend 1.5 years or so working at Innocent Drinks, a smoothie company. I know this sounds unrelated to whiskey, but bear with me. When I was at Bain, and I was really inspired by their commitment to sustainability and kind of the thought of business having a greater purpose in the world other than just making money. And that was really the first time I'd seen that. I'd seen the big corporates, you know, FTSE 100 listed businesses, it's all about profit. I'd seen charities, and yet there seemed to be this middle ground where sustainability and other important things like job creation and so on were really important. I was like, wow, that is really cool. And I guess I took that on personally. And then a few years later, when I was thinking about this whiskey distillery idea that my family had, I went and visited lots of distilleries. And I really felt like that purpose, that focus on sustainability wasn't there in the whiskey industry. And I felt like that was a great shame. And in particular, we know that the next generation of consumers really care about this stuff. And I think Scotch is amazing. The traditions are amazing as well, by the way. But I really wanted to make sure that Scotch could appeal to that next generation of drinkers. And I felt like if it didn't take on that philosophy, it might not.
That's amazing to see it. And, you know, you already mentioned how remote you guys are. And I remember doing that drive and just being like, holy shit, are we coming to a distillery here? Like, we gone the wrong way. So, I mean, there must have been like a load of challenges that you had when you set up the distillery and having this idea in your head. Can you walk us through some of them?
Yeah, lots of challenges. I mean, building it there was probably the first challenge, and it still amuses me today. We get lots of German visitors to the distillery, and whenever they come, they say, but we would not have roads like this in Germany. We would just fix it. And we had exactly that challenge with getting our biomass boiler in. So the whole distillery is run on renewable energy. And in our case, that is a biomass boiler, and it was made in Austria and Germany. So they brought it to the UK on those big Autobahn trucks that you see. And it took some pretty stressful phone calls for us to persuade them not to bring the boiler all the way to the distillery on these big trucks. And eventually our main contractor threatened to send the police to the Corran Ferry to stop them bringing their big trucks down our tiny single track roads. So that was pretty stressful. I mean, just literally just housing and feeding the contractors on site was tricky. And then there's the question of who on earth is going to want to run and work in this remote area. But part of our philosophy has always been about creating jobs in Morven, which is this little peninsula that we're on, creating long-term skilled year-round jobs. And actually that has been one of the coolest bits of it. We now employ 12 people at the distillery, all living in the local community. And whilst that seemed like a big challenge up front, has actually been one of the most joyous bits of the whole process. So
amazing.
Absolutely. That's super cool. So one of the things that we were looking at when I was just kind of digging into all the stuff that you guys have done, obviously, this net zero status that you guys have got coming on, like it's insane. Like, so why was that? And how do you maintain that? Like, how do you build upon such an amazing starting point? Like, this is what we're watching major distilleries around the world try to get to now. And that's where you began.
Well, I guess there's a couple of things to say there. First of all is I feel like it's incumbent on any new business nowadays to approach sustainability in the right way, i.e. build it in from the beginning, because unlike if you're building a distillery 50 or 100 years ago, you know what the right answer is now. So use renewable energy. The second thing to say, though, is that it is much easier as a new distillery to do things right the first time rather than try to retrofit it in an existing distillery. So from that point of view, we had a major advantage. But what's interesting is when we were raising funds for the distillery, which was kind of 2013 to 2015 timing, a load of investors just didn't care about sustainability. And they would say things out loud that would just not be acceptable to say even now, which gives you a sense of how much the world has changed in 10 years. But I was really determined to make everything as sustainable as possible. And so I tried to figure out the biggest things up front, the kind of structural things that I couldn't change afterwards. And one of those was renewable energy. And that is the most kind of important component of our net zero status. So we're net zero for our own operations, which means what happens at the distillery. So we use biomass for most of our energy. So most of the energy in the distillery is steam to power the stills, and that all comes from a forest 2 miles up the road. Our distillers are also wood chippers. They are the ones in charge of actually chipping the wood and bringing it to the distillery. We buy a small amount of renewable electricity. It's not a huge amount. And even our tractors run on biodiesel. But the key thing for us, as you alluded to, is kind of the rest. There's a whole load of stuff that happens outside the distillery where we have always tried to make the right decisions. So we only buy organic barley, for example, but there's still a lot left to go out there. And that's our kind of continuing focus, is to try and improve on things. So as a good example, our bottles made of 100% recycled glass, 40% lower carbon footprint than a flint glass, but still takes a lot of energy to make those. And that is not renewable energy at the moment. So trying to work with our suppliers, for example, to improve on that.
Very cool. Very cool indeed.
I love that. And I remember reading something that you said that you were almost kind of laughed at for wanting to use recyclable bottles, because people were like, oh, that's not what premium whiskey does, right? And that's probably
totally.
coming back to some of those comments you were getting before.
Well, this has happened time and time again. Like when we were raising money, we were laughed at for wanting to use renewable energy because the boiler itself was so much more expensive than a bog standard oil boiler. When I said to Jim Swan I wanted to use organic barley, he told me it was an expensive waste of time. When we phoned up glass manufacturers in the UK saying, have you got any recycled glass? They were like, you can't put premium spirits in recycled glass. No consumers will ever accept that. So yeah, there's a lot of, you kind of just have to keep going to do the right thing.
It is fascinating to see, like you said, like how those conversations have completely swung around in the space of 10 years. It's mad, right? Right. So Annabel, I want to start talking about the whiskies here. This is a bit of a sore point for Nicholas because, as usual, he's going to cry about not having any, and I've got these delicious samples sitting in front of me. I do believe yours is on its way, Nicholas.
It is.
They're coming.
Don't cry too much. So The first sample you sent me, which was really interesting. I mean, obviously, I've tried your organic before, which is a beautiful drop. But you sent me some of the Huntress. Let's chat about that. Where did the sort of inspiration for that come from?
Yeah, this is a really cool one. I'm glad you picked that to talk about first. So Huntress Orchard Cobbler, which we released in April of 2024. Where to start? So Huntress is all about all about the innovative side of what we do. And I coming into whiskey, I just really wanted to be more exploratory, more creative, more kind of pushing the boundaries than maybe I was seeing in some of the more traditional distilleries. And there's lots of ways we do that. And previous Huntress editions have been focused on our yeast trials. But this one, Orchard Cobbler, is not. It is, and this is going to get a bit geeky, so hold on. It is the product of the transition between two different spirit recipes we make in the distillery. So Jim Swan, who was our master distiller, famous for making great young whiskey, he had a specific spirit recipe, if you like, that we follow for 80% of our production. So we call that the young recipe because it's going to make great young whiskey. But I had a conversation with Jim that said, yeah, but what about if we want to make great old whiskey? And he said, oh, you wouldn't make it like that. You'd make it like this. So incoming spirit recipe number 2, so-called the old recipe. So 2017, we started production and we make most of the time young recipe, and then we make old recipe for like 6 weeks of the year. And then we noticed that we were getting these incredible spikes in our new make analytics coming back from the lab. And we pinned them down to a couple of weeks. And I was saying to Gordon, our distillery manager, what are you doing in these weeks? They're delicious. Why can't we do more of them? Come around the next year, 2018, and we find we're getting the same thing again. And it turns out this is the transition week between old recipe and new recipe. And we change the cut points, but we just blend through the low wines and faints tank. So when we switch back onto the young recipe, we're making the cut points higher. And you get all of these higher alcohols that we haven't been capturing in the old recipe, but have been hanging out and building up in the low wines and faints tank, come flooding out in this first week, basically. And so we called this the transition weeks, or the cutover weeks between the recipes, and we'd logged them in our warehouse sheet so we know where they are. And I've just been sitting on them, desperate to release them. We thought it was a little too geeky for our first couple of Huntress releases, so we've really held on tight and saved it for this year. And I think the result is amazing. It's really fruity, and we called it Orchard Cobbler because it's got that like plummy, jammy notes, but also this kind of baked bakery flavors, and also this little bit of peppermint, which is really cool.
And it's perfect for today. You know, we were just chatting about before I came on that it's 30 degrees up in Speyside today, and it's definitely got that summer fresh fruit note coming through. What do you think, Nicholas? Oh no, sorry. Yeah.
So mean.
Oh well. All right. Okay. Just let that. So obviously, I mean, I can tell by Mitch's face that these whiskies are fantastic, and obviously, Huntress. That story's incredible, and I love that because it's almost like the Palo Cortado of your distillery. It's this little, you never get it. Like it's this 1 week, I guess, that where it's just transition, exactly. And you're not going to keep transitioning back and forth just to make more of it. So it really is that little. Maybe a couple of times a year, you're going to get this little unique distillate.
And what I also love about it, right, is we never intended to make it. It's the product of doing things differently, but in an unexpected way. And I sort of think that's a cool reason alone for doing things differently, right? If you don't try, you don't know.
I love that. And then you've also got Quiet Rebels, which I was taking a look at. And obviously this concept is focused on individual team members. It's very personalized, and each edition of the Quiet Rebel series seems to tell a unique story about, you know, the people in your business. And like, how has this personalized approach been received by your team, by your customers? And like, can you share any details about the latest edition and what makes it so special?
Yeah, so I guess this is kind of the other side of the business that we're talking about, creating jobs. And we talk a lot about the environmental sustainability, but the people side of stuff is also really important to the business. And yeah, I just wanted to celebrate that in whiskey form, not just in talking about it form. So we make these Quiet Rebels editions every autumn, and they're really designed as much as we can to be to that person's taste. So the one that is out in the market at the moment is Gordon's. Gordon has been our distillery manager since the very beginning. And he really likes this kind of rich, fruity style of whiskey. Really he describes it as tasty, tasty, or leaving your mouth wanting more. And so we created the Quiet Rebels. Gordon is a lot of I should say that most of the Quiet Rebels series end up being focused on whiskey finishes from a flavour point of view, because we start designing it kind of a year in advance. So we're not talking 10 years in advance. So we're using the casks that we have in our warehouse and finishes. And so Quiet Rebels Gordon has got a load of STR red wine casks, which are part of our organic range, but don't make up so much of it. Lots of sherry again. We normally only use 2% sherry in Nc'nean Organic. This has got 19%, I think. And then a dash of Rive Salt, which is a French sweet wine. So that was used as a finish. So really different style of whiskey, in particular, different to the Huntress, much bolder, fruitier, spicier.
Who's coming up with these? Who's coming up with these casks? Is this the team? Is this you leading the charge of innovation? Is it a community effort?
It's, well, for Quiet Rebel series specifically, it tends to be that Matt, who's our blender, sits down with the person and they taste a whole range of whiskies, some Nc'nean, some not, and Matt tries to get this kind of feel for what that person likes, and then he'll figure out, well, we can use some of this that we've already got, but we probably need to bring in some finishes, and then we'll bring in the finishing casks. And
that's so cool.
There we go. And then there'll be another session towards the end where Matt and that person, in this case Gordon, sit down and like take what's come out of the finishing casks and blend it all together and test it, integrate it. So,
Annabel, I want to rewind a little bit. I mean, I think with you guys, what's very interesting, and it's a conversation that we're having a lot more within the Scotch whisky industry now, is yeast. And I know you guys have been messing around with a lot of different types of yeast strains. I was just with a blender a couple of months ago. I won't call him out. He does actually listen to this podcast. But he said quite publicly, like, why is everyone messing about with yeast strains? It's not making any difference. What would you say to someone like that? That's, I know you've been messing about with yeast strains since the start. What difference have you been seeing?
Yeah, I would disagree. It definitely makes a difference. I'm fascinated with yeast. I drink a lot of craft beer, and I guess, if in that craft beer world, you get a lot of brewers talking a lot about yeast, which is because it makes a difference to flavour. And I guess coming as a bit of an outsider into whiskey, I was thinking, well, basically we're making beer and distilling it, so why does no one care about yeast? That was to some extent reinforced by Jim Swan, who always had this 2 yeast recipe. And that was he married these 2 yeasts together to bring this range of flavour, and in particular bring out the kind of fruity flavours. So every Nc'nean out there has at least 2 yeasts in it. And I guess I also looked at the industry and felt like, a lot of this stuff has been standardised. It's been developed for a consistent flavour profile and yield, which is no bad thing, but it's not our style. So why not see what else happens? So we just started tinkering around. And in fact, we were working on it last week when I was at the distillery. We'll take yeasts that aren't meant or weren't designed, if you like, for distilling, and we'll combine them with the 2 yeasts that we do use and do them initially in literally buckets. So we call them bucket trials. And we'll take 3 or 4 yeasts, we'll try them in different proportions and see how the wash tastes. We don't distill it at that stage. And the ones that we like, we then scale up to a couple of weeks worth of distilling. And we've done all sorts. We've done wine yeasts, beer yeasts, spirit yeasts, and they all produce different flavour profiles. Not all are as good as each other, honestly. But that's the point of experimenting. I wouldn't say there are any that haven't. There aren't any that haven't worked, but there are some that are definitely not ready yet, which I guess would lead you to conclude they're not as good. So we used a champagne yeast, which I thought sounded really cool because I quite like champagne, but it's not ready to be released yet. But we also used a rum yeast, and we released that 2 years ago. That was delicious. Last year, we released the expression we call woodland candy, and that it was like this grassy herbalness combined with sweetness, which was delicious. And that was white wine yeast, red wine yeast, and our 2 normal yeasts. And we've been doing a lot of work more recently with beer yeast, which we're finding also have amazing impact, but they're expensive. But that's also often the price you pay for either sustainability or flavour, I find.
Indeed. So how has the local community reacted to your focus on sustainability and organic production? Is there like any community projects or collaborations right now that you're really proud of, or things that you've got coming down the pipeline?
Yeah, really positively. And that kind of relates to the point I was saying about creating local employment and things. That's been a really cool process to see. From an environmental sustainability point of view, we are supporting this year a very local environmental project, which is actually on the Malvern Peninsula, which is really cool. We also support the local community trust, which is, I guess, more the people side of sustainability and societal side, with whatever they deem to be important. And then also the social side, which is obviously key for whiskey, because ultimately it's about drinking and having fun, and there's no point in producing a sustainable whiskey if it's boring and disgusting. So we have we actually 2 weeks ago, we hosted a whole community party where we bus everyone down the last 11 miles of single track road for a little shindig at the distillery, which is really fun and just a nice chance for everyone to get together. And also, as you saw, Mitch, we're kind of at the end of the road, so we're just encouraging people to do that last 11 miles and come down and see us is nice. And then, as with all over the Highlands, the kind of games and gala weeks are really important. So the Malvern Games and Gala Week is coming up next month, and we're supporting that. We'll have a special single cask there, and we sponsor a barrel race, which our warehouse team don't always win, which is a bit embarrassing, maybe because they've had too many of the whiskies beforehand. But that's a fun way for it to put the distillery kind of at the heart of those community occasions.
That's awesome.
I almost feel like it'd be easier visiting you guys going over to Mull and just jumping on a boat from Tobermory and then coming straight over, right?
Well, that is an awesome way to get there, and actually that's another way. We also support this local water taxi. So there's a water taxi that runs every other week between Nc'nean, where we are, and Tobermory. So if you time it right, you can get a little water taxi from Tobermory to Nc'nean, which is, as you say, by far the best way to arrive.
That's the way to do it, for sure, for sure. So, Annabel, let's chat about future for Nc'nean. You know, we're 5 years on from now. What do you want to achieve with the distillery, with the whiskey? Where's your head at with that?
Well, apart from global domination, I would like to hope that we have... You know, it's really about, we're still so early, it's actually just about continuing to get our message out, continuing to release cool, interesting whiskies, and hopefully get those whiskies going further afield. So we just launched into the US last year, and we're kind of now turning our focus to Asia and starting to get a foothold in some of those further away markets is key, whilst also continuing to do fun stuff, continuing to think about making whiskey in a different way and releasing delicious stuff. And also, as I mentioned, trying to, continuing to work on those much harder aspects of sustainability.
And on that note, so you've set such a high bar for sustainability for the industry. What advice would you give to other distilleries out there looking to follow in your footsteps?
I think it would be two things. One is you've got to choose the right solution for your distillery. And that varies massively by distillery, by setup, by location, all the rest of it. So there is no one size fits all. And I think the second would be, if you think it's the right thing to do, do it. And I think our experience shows that. We were told no at every step of the way. And I don't think any of those decisions that we've made that we felt like were the right thing to do have been the wrong thing to do. So follow your gut and do the right thing.
Very cool.
Fantastic. And Annabel, for anyone listening, you guys are very much widespread right now, but where can they go for more information on Nc'nean? Give yourself a big plug here.
Start with our website, which is ncnean.com. So N for November, by the way, not F for mother, because everyone always misspells it as Nc'nean. Nc'nean. N for November, C, N for November, EAN.com. And we're also on social, same handle at Nc'nean. Follow us on Instagram is where we're most active. And try us out any good shop or bar in most of Europe, the US and Canada, and soon to be Asia.
Amazing. Annabel, thank you so much for giving us your time. We know how busy you are, so this has been great to have you on 30 Minutes on Not Another Whiskey podcast, and we're wishing you nothing but amazing success for the future. Thanks so much.
Thanks for having me. What fun.